Hey guys, I'm back. Today we're talking about shutter speed and everything you need to know about it in under 5 minutes. Let's do it. Shutter speed, or exposure time, is the length of time that your sensor is exposed to light or your film. And what this does is it allows us to control a few different things. It lets us capture motion blur, it lets us do long exposures, it lets us capture action right at its peak and really freeze that motion. So to have that in our control is one of the most powerful tools that we have in photography, and you need to master it. So grab your camera, and here's a quick experiment you can do to kind of visualize and really see what's happening in that camera to give you a better idea of what shutter speed's actually doing. So first of all, go ahead and turn your camera to shutter priority. What this is going to do is it's going to give you control over the shutter speed and let the camera choose the rest of the settings for you automatically. So here I've got my DSLR here and I'm on shutter priority, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to about 1/100th of a second, and I'm going to release the shutter. I'm going to show you exactly how long that takes. So it's pretty quick, you can hear it. So we're going to turn it up now even faster. We're going to go up to 1/1000th of a second. And you can actually hear the difference, and that's really capturing that moment. It's 1/1000th of a second that that's open for, letting that light in to expose that image. Now if we go the other way, we're going to go all the way down to 1/25th of a second. And it sounds a bit slower. And still we can go even further. We're going to go down to let's go down to 1 second. And what that did is it held open that shutter for 1 second, letting in all that light. Now, if you did that with a normal picture, for one thing, if you're not on a tripod, it's going to be really blurry because you can't hold it perfectly still. Even with image stabilization, there is a limit. Now, there are a few really important things to know when using shutter priority. One of them is always use at least double your focal length in shutter speed. So if your focal length is 100, you're going to want to have at least a 200 shutter speed. Now for me, there's only usually a few situations I find myself in for the most part. I'm either running around shooting action with this giant beast right here. This is a 150 to 600. And typically when I'm using this, I'm using really high shutter speeds, usually 800 and above. You're usually trying to stick between the 1600 to 2000 area when I'm shooting birds, when you're shooting sports, when you really want to freeze that action. On the other hand, when you're shooting things like landscapes or portraits, when your focal length is a lot smaller, you're going to be able to get away with a much smaller shutter speed. Another tip I have for you is for when you're shooting in a non-studio environment, when your light is constantly changing, set your camera to auto ISO. And what this is going to do is when you're shooting all over the place and the light's changing, it's going to take that into consideration. You're going to have that same shutter speed, but that ISO is going to fluctuate. And that's going to leave you with a better picture and not a ruined picture. Now let's break down a few pictures that I've taken here and see how shutter speed comes into play. Here you can see even at 1/1250th of a second, you can still see some motion blur in the wings, even though the body's sharp. Here we've got the same shutter speed and even more motion blur. So if I really wanted to capture those wings, I'd really want to put it up to somewhere maybe around 2000 or higher. This guy wasn't moving, so I was able to throw my camera onto my tripod, drop my shutter speed down to 1/13th of a second, and put my ISO all the way down to 100. This allowed me to really draw out a lot of detail from my raw photo. Here's the picture straight out of camera. And here it is again edited. In this picture I'm using a technique called panning. However, the shutter speed wasn't quite fast enough. This time with a little bit faster shutter speed, it worked out great. With a shutter speed of 1000, I was able to capture this moment in perfect sharpness. In this last one, I put my shutter speed all the way down to 25 seconds, so I was able to capture the sparks from the fire and the stars in the sky. Well, that's it, guys. Thanks so much for watching. If you got something out of it, consider giving me a subscribe and a like. Drop your questions and comments down below. And of course, make mistakes, be yourself, get out there and take some pictures. See you next time.